Okay. So again, this is about a quick video here, short one, explaining why people are having such a hard time grasping Bitcoin current day.
World easily right now, but you are a bull among a lot of bears out there still. It even took you, 7 to 8 years to sort of convince yourself that Bitcoin was something that, you should convert your own balance sheet to, and obviously now you're doing it. But how do you convince others, the big tech players out there, the giants, Meta, Google, Microsoft? How do you get them to flip like Larry?
I think you have to make it easy, and you have to give people gateway products that they can use. You have to give them Bitcoin with guardrails. You have to give them domestic Bitcoin, not wild Bitcoin.
What is that? What's domestic Bitcoin versus wild Bitcoin? Is that like IBIT versus on market and cold storage?
Raw Bitcoin is you buy Bitcoin, and you self-custody it, and the next is you buy Bitcoin with a custodian. But more domesticated, a simple domesticated Bitcoin is IBIT and FBTC. I buy it through BlackRock, right? And that's a lot easier to handle. We're back to $900 trillion of capital. Real estate investors, they want to buy something that looks like real estate, right? And bond investors want to buy something that looks like a bond. And preferred stock wants to buy something that looks like preferred stock. And some people want half the upside as a capital gain, but they don't want the downside. So they got to buy something like a convert. And options traders, they want to trade options. So when Bitcoin first came out, there were none of these things. And then for a while, there was an entire crypto economy that was created offshore, too much colorful drama and anxiety, like the FTXs of the world, et cetera. Well, those are unregulated crypto exchanges, and conventional, traditional, regulated investors can't trade in that. And it's probably good they didn't, right? Because most of them failed. So what we're watching right now since 2020 is the creation of the institutional vehicles in order to invest in Bitcoin. And, I've got this saying, I say, everybody's against Bitcoin before they're for it, right? We're all against it until we're for it. I was. Why are you against it? It's like, well, why are you against electricity in 1880? I'm sure the first guy with fire, he scared a bunch of other tribesmen, and they're like, what happens if you get too close to fire? It burns you. No one wants to get burned, right? The idiom is no one wants to get burned. And yet without fire, we're not better than the apes. And then what happens when we play with electricity? We get shocked. Who wants to get shocked? It's another idiom in the English language. Shock is bad. And yet without electricity, like 90% of humanity is dead.
I love that the siren just went off in the background as you were talking about the shock.
It happens. And so new technologies are scary, right? People thought that if you got in an automobile went more than 10 miles an hour, it would suck the oxygen out of the cabin and you would suffocate.
Can't be better than a horse, right?
Yeah. So if you look at the great revolutions in energy, right? Fire was extracting energy from matter. Water was extracting energy from gravity, right? That's the big idea. There's gravity, there's energy in this field. If I put water there in a water clock and it comes down here, I can turn a wheel with it, right? Big idea. And then wind, extracting energy from the atmosphere. And then the steam engine is, let's refine the entire idea and move create an engine that takes that energy and spins something so that kids don't have to do it, right? The steam engine eliminates slavery. It's a pretty good idea, right? And then after that, gasoline and internal combustion engines, and then, what follows next, nuclear reactors and electricity. And each of these energy revolutions, it was a shocking, scary paradigm shift. And for 30 years, people rejected it, and they had good reason, because their city burned down and their house burned down and they got electrocuted and my airplane fell out of the sky, right? It's like and if you study James Watt, he spent his entire life trying to make the steam engine work. Not easy, right? It's not easy. Bitcoin's digital energy. Satoshi figured out a way to both transfer and store, to basically store and channel energy through cyberspace without an intermediary. That's a profound breakthrough, because that means I can put $1 billion in cyberspace. I can move it 60 times a second. I can hold it for 1 million years. And I'm not facing counterparty risk to a bank, a country, a currency, a corporation, right? A culture, a commodity manufacturer. And so that's a profound idea. We're 15 years into the innovation. We're only 4 years into the, to the crazy years. And really, January 2024 was really the beginning of this era. Maybe this is year 0 of institutional adoption. When we have regulatory acceptance, bank acceptance, and accounting acceptance of Bitcoin, those 3 planks, that's year 1 of adoption. And when do you have that? Well, you kind of got 75% regulatory acceptance since we got these ETFs. Not all, most. When we have IBIT trading on the options market, that's a big step forward. And when you can do in-kind create and redemptions of the ETFs, you've got full regulatory acceptance of the asset. Then January 2025, fair value accounting becomes the norm. And now you've got accounting acceptance. And now you can mark up and mark down the asset just like Apple stock or just like other assets. And then when you have too big to fail banks, when you have the BNY Mellons of the world or the JP Morgans of the world, the State Streets of the world, they custody the Bitcoin or they buy and they sell and they hold the Bitcoin. You'll have banking acceptance. And what are banks? Banks are just institutions that are engineered to be custodians of financial assets. So of course, the greatest custodians of assets in the world need to custody this asset. So we're right in the middle of that. And I think maybe 2025, you can call year 1 of the institutional era of digital capital, that thing which is Bitcoin.
I want to come to the banks because I'm very keen to talk to you about how.
All right, I think that's enough for now. So highly recommend both those parts. The Bitcoin, I forget what the first one was called. Anyways, they're both on the same channel here. Part 1 came out last week. Part 2 came out last night. I've only made through about half of this, and I saw a lot of clips on Twitter, Nostr about it. But a couple things there. I think that's the biggest one that we really have to keep in mind here is the digital energy aspect of that. Digital energy, the transformation of it, being able to send it anywhere on the globe without anybody's permission. Like that's a very big idea. And he talked about the steam engine, electricity, fire, everything that's come before us here to this exact day. And to me, it's like same with the automobile. All these big ideas had a lot of opposition when they first got off the ground because there's a lot of people who have their entire livelihoods in the old system, right? So at the time when automobiles came out, this is a crazy story, actually. This is something I just learned this year, I think. But when the automobile came out, it was such a scary idea for people and so out of their normal comfort zone that they actually, and I'm pretty sure this is true. Don't quote me on this, but this is what I've seen in terms of a story behind the car. Well, they actually had to put a horse's head on the front of a car just so people's mind could tie the two together. And so if you think about all the people who were pissed off when the automobile came out, like the horse owners, the horse maintainers, the horse trainers, the people who sold accessories to put on the horse so that you could travel on a horse. All those people's livelihoods were at stake when the automobile came out. And there's probably a lot of pushback. There's probably a lot of people saying, hey, these cars are very dangerous. Stick to the horses. They've withstood the test of time. We can rely on them. And there was early adopters. And probably, unfortunately, just like in Bitcoin, the early adopters of the automobile, probably same with the airplane. Probably a lot of them did not survive that early adoption. And just like in Bitcoin, 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, the very early adopters there, a lot of them probably didn't make it out. They're probably alive, but they probably lost a significant amount, especially in today's values. And so I think we're kind of past that point now. And he called January 2024 when the ETFs came out in the US, year 0. And I think that that's absolutely true. And you have to keep in mind here that as much as we like to romanticize and fantasize about this world where people just hold Bitcoin, there's no banks, there's no government, it's going to be a long time before we get there. Because think about how long you've been in Bitcoin. Think about how many hurdles you've had, how many hours you spent in Bitcoin. And think about how hard it is to go over that through that learning curve of not only buying Bitcoin, understanding Bitcoin, but learning how to custody that Bitcoin yourself. Do you think that the majority of people, younger or older, but especially older, do you think they're going to want to take on that risk? Do you think they're going to want to put their entire life savings into an asset that they have no idea about, that they don't know how to hold, and that they don't trust yet? So that's where the banks and these bigger institutions are going to come in for this bridge, for the, he called it a gateway. And that's what it is, because we don't know what's going to happen with government and policy and regulation in a couple of decades from now. But we do know that people will start there. That's going to be their gateway into Bitcoin, is having a bank, having somebody else take on that risk. And yes, I agree with you. I don't want that for myself. I don't want the bank to be able to hold my Bitcoin. I want to hold my Bitcoin, but I've also put in thousands of hours of work to try and understand this thing and try to figure out the best way to protect that for me. And you compare that to 99% of the people who have spent 0 hours doing that. So it's not like you can just take a leap of faith and say, okay, well, Bitcoin price is going up, so I want to put my 20% of my wealth in there and I'll just figure it out. Nobody's going to do that. And so that's where all the money is still sitting on the sidelines, because that hasn't been available yet. So to the people who think that having banks hold Bitcoin, I mean, even I think it was Hal Finney himself in the early days of the Satoshi emails, and his vision of Bitcoin was that smaller banks, like something like a Fedimint or a bank, a new bank would pop up and hold Bitcoin for people. So it's not like it goes against Bitcoin's, vision for it. It's what has to happen. And I think that if you don't understand that, then you're living in a dream world.